This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello and Namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Hello and Namaste. Thank you for joining me once again. I'm back from a little hiatus. Before diving into some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you and invite you to contemplate, I wanted to open the show with a little meditation track. The following audio is being used for the, explicit, creative edutainment and spiritual collaboration. I don't actually have permission to play it, but I'm a rebel like that. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody's rights. I'm actually playing it in the app, and I'm sure they're getting something for me playing it. So, as putting on my influencer hat, if you have not yet downloaded and tried out this meditation app, Insight Timer is available on the App Store for Android phones. I'm not sure, I haven't looked recently, if it's available on Mac platforms. When I first got onto Macs, I looked and it wasn't there, and it's been a bit, so I should check again. At any rate, the following is a brief meditation track by a choir known as Beautiful Chorus. It's from an album titled Resonance Meditation. So not only can you meditate to this app on Insight Timer and have it track all your meditation time and whatnot, which is a great motivator. It keeps you going. It works. I can personally endorse this app. I also encourage you to look up this group and support them on their social media and let them know that I sent you to them, just in case, Because this is actually a group I would love, personally, artistically speaking, to collaborate with. Which is why I'm choosing to share them despite not having reached out to ask for permission, because I believe in the higher spiritual calling at hand. And so this is sort of my asynchronous collaboration. I will, I think this summer, when I have time to do all the grand things I have yet to do this year, and, basically all of the last half of last year, but since last summer I've been too busy to do most of the things I would like to be doing on my free time. One of the things I want to do is reach out to artists like these beautiful singing ladies. I believe it's all female choir. I could be wrong about that, and forgive me if I am. I didn't mean to make any kind of rude assumptions. But I digress. I want to open the show with this because I think it's both beautiful and deeply powerful, and I hope that it resonates with you and that you go support them and engage with them and meditate with their art, because I think that's what they're out to try and do, right? Help people meditate. So take a moment if you can. If you're driving or whatnot, stay focused. It should still be groovy to listen to if you're busy doing something else. But stay focused, don't close your eyes, etc., etc. But if you are in a place where you can take a moment and shut off your screens, or at least turn away from them, it's very short, it's a 1-minute meditation. If you can do that, please join me in sitting and centering yourself and silencing your mind as gently as you can. It's not about controlling your mind, it's about forgiving it and soothing it into its own place of silence. Om Shani Metta Shanti Om Namaste. Indeed, may our hearts be open. Thank you for joining me in that. And again, please go engage with this beautiful group of meditation artists and support them on their social media and etc., etc. Do all the things. Click all the buttons. And thank you for joining me in that brief moment of random meditation. Indeed, may our hearts be open. May our hearts open up. When one looks back through history, one sees an interesting coincidence that the heart is constantly referenced by those identified as prophets or masters or enlightened ones. The heart is poetically spoken of in many ways, and in one harmonic thread of commonality, the opening of the heart is a metaphysical event that we are invited to investigate by all those who could be considered spiritual guides. That's a big question to leap up into, right? Like, what does that mean? How do we open our hearts? And I think at a certain level, the most honest answer cannot be put into words, because it is about seeking deep within and identifying through deep internal phenomenological experience that is beyond words, connecting to one's own heart and opening it in whatever way that means, spiritually, metaphorically, energetically, etc. One can say, one can argue, one can postulate or put forward the thesis that if there is a meaning to life, if there is a calling that's being called out to us in some spiritual way, the opening of the heart is integral to that, to our response to the calling. That even if we only think of the world in materialistic and mundane ways, and we see the phrase opening of the heart as an allegorical, imaginative symbol for something intangible and fanciful, it's still a powerful thing to utilize. The reason I say that is because while subjective truth is always relativistic and very little in the universe is absolute, there are some things that are so true that by our measure they can be seen as absolute enough. Now, let me interject here. First, I want to take a moment and welcome any new listeners. Thank you for joining this mental headspace, this shared headspace that we create when we engage each other in this way. And I hope that both new and old listeners feel welcome and encouraged to engage with the show on its various social media platforms, because the long-term vision of this show is for it to be sort of an audience engagement conversation type show. So now I've been doing it on and off, kind of as I can, when I can, working with what rudimentary tools I had at my disposal at the time, and working towards, building towards better tools and whatnot. And I'm glad to announce that I think that this year, as we approach the summer in particular, I've reached a new, level of preparedness. And so I hope that the show will improve in its level of engagingness, its level of appeal for audiences. And if in that process, as I approach that process and begin to execute it, if you, dear listener, new or old, have ideas, suggestions, and comments you'd like to share with me as I go through and reboot, remix, and sort of reformat old episodes and approach new episodes from a new perspective, please, please, please do engage with the show on its social media platforms. Instagram, I mean, you can find me on all the, if you just type in @Mr. Zeppo, you'll find my Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook. Those are the basic primary ones that I use the most. And if you know of a cool, up-and-coming, very useful platform that I should be on, hit me up. All right. So, back to today's show before I spiral out of control. As I was getting ready and asking myself, I really want to end my hiatus. What am I going to talk about on the very first episode? And which segment am I going to kick it off with? I was gently and curiously reminded of a conversation I had recently with a dear friend. Well, actually, it was more of a conversation I kicked in a couple of 2 bits into and then sort of just was a passive part-time member of. So, as I do, I keep these sorts of things anonymous, mostly because I don't know if my friends and associates and acquaintances would or would not appreciate me discussing them on this podcast. Some people find what I have to share too bizarre, and others find it bordering on offensive, which I apologize for. My goal is not to offend anyone. But I digress. This conversation was going on, which I was privy to by being, within earshot, but not actually a huge part of. And they approached a comparison of how our current president responded to the Khashoggi killing and how our most recent president might have, theoretically, based on everyone's opinions of that president, might have responded to the same incident had it happened during his time in office. And I was going to not comment at all, but someone teed it up too well, and I couldn't miss this beat. The theater practitioner in me, the actor, the improv player, slash improv playwright writer, is like, this is the line. My character would drop this line right here, right now, and then walk away. And as it happened, I gave in and I said, they're all puppets. And I'm not missing a beat of my dear friend called back, they're not all puppets. And I could have at that moment launched into my formal explanation of what I actually mean when I say they're all puppets. Because it's really weird for a person who self-identifies or declares that one cannot cling to ideology, one should not cling to ideology, right? And people often get very confused. I get accused of peddling a very strange ideology. And I'm like, is the abdication of ideology an ideology? ? That's a whole nother episode. But I also declare, as part of sort of like who I am and what I think is real, that very little is absolute. I think I opened the show with this, right? Very little in the universe is absolute. And there are some things that are so grand enough, so big enough in scale that they might as well be considered absolute from our perspective, but they themselves are not, indeed, in absolute terms, actually absolute. But that's a whole discussion of relative scale and how much relative scale you're willing to concede actually exists. Here's what I mean. My humble critique of anyone consciously or unconsciously rooted in any kind of materialism, and I don't mean the love of material objects like I need to buy more fur coats or whatever, I need to own more yachts. That's a illness that extends from what I'm actually talking about. But like true like political or philosophical materialism, that there is only the material world, everything else is nonsense. And like that's debunked by physics. Like that's already been proven wrong, right? There are levels to reality that exist and operate that can be both anticipated and described mathematically. In other words, our ability to describe them varies, but we can derive descriptions mathematically which then conform to measurable phenomena in reality. And that's the thing about science that science deniers are just radically ignoring, is that when science is done well, I'm not claiming that science is 100% uncorrupt. Of course there's corruption in science. I've already done episodes about that. Or at least addressed it in past episodes, right? Of course there's corruption in science. All human endeavors are not absolutely good or absolutely evil. There's always a mix of everything going on in any given institution trying to achieve any given goal where there's more than 3 people involved. Period. That's just going to happen. Even at the 3-person level, we're human beings. Now, to say that's just human nature is to also concede that we don't understand human nature because you're accepting a very limited view of human nature. But I digress. When science is done right, it verifies that which it postulates with something tangible out there in the external world that it can arguably measure. And what materialists radically ignore or try to include without conceding it indicates something larger is at hand than pure materialism, is that here's the thing that like stabs, is a thorn in the side of materialists, especially savvy ones who really get what materialism actually is. And that's that the human apparatus, as we understand it, our bodies, can only currently, as we know how to operate them, and I insert an asterisk here to try to clarify my language, there are declarations, theoretical or otherwise. In other words, some people posit theories, some people claim personal experience. Throughout history, currently and in the past, statements that indicate that the human apparatus may have other modes of operation different from the common ones that we are typically aware of and used to in our day-to-day mundane lives. But as we sit in these typical day-to-day mundane life operation modalities, we basically can only perceive about 1 or 2%. The number varies. And, given the totality of the volume of what we're talking about, 1 or 2% is quite a lot. But it also is not at all approaching even, half of what's going on. So we can only perceive 1 or 2% of all the available data, of the available phenomena, the stuff going on in the universe that can otherwise actually be measured because of scientific advances. Now, I know that there's an extreme science denial movement out there that says all of that is a hoax and all of it is fabricated and none of it can be verified. But the irony is science goes to great lengths to try to duplicate and verify things. And while it's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and declare the entire bathtub nothing but useless, it's also usually a mistake. So, returning to the puppet theme. How I got off on science, I don't even remember now. But reeling all that back in, I interjected this thing about, they're all puppets. Oh, right. I was explaining that I'm a non-absolutist. I don't think anything is absolute at all times. So why would I say they are all puppets? I think most people might presume or assume or project into that statement that I am expressing the foregone conclusion that all politicians are owned and operated, materially speaking, and I guess perhaps let us say ideologically speaking, by some other person or group of people that are either covert or not covert in their actions or their organized behavior of trying to control and manipulate politicians. Now, here's where we can explore the difference between judgment and discernment. A judgy person would fall on some sort of extreme opposite end of that's true or that's not true and try to declare it one or the other in sort of absolute terms, in black and white terms, right? A more nuanced person might concede that yes, corruption exists, etc. But then coping with the issue of puppeteering itself, I think most of us are inclined to hope that, and I'm not criticizing this, I'm just expressing that this is, I think, where most average people's thinking might sit. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I apologize. I'm not out to offend anybody. But I'm trying to clarify the difference between what I think most people might project onto my statement and what my statement means to me. Okay, so let's just get to that, right? Instead of swirling the bush. No, that's not the right. Instead of circling the bush, beating around the bush, swirling the toilet bowl. There we go. Full circle. When I say they're all puppets, I don't mean every single politician is owned and operated by some other human being, although I do think a lot of that goes on. Do I think that our current president is... Am I presuming or prejudging him? No. Innocent until proven guilty, man. If he's just really crazy, kooky, and just likes dictators and horrible, oppressive regimes, then he's just a horrible person. Great. But is it possible, and very likely, that he's being influenced? Quite probably by money, and has been so for a long time, because it's not new. It's not a new issue. Trump going to Russia and or Russians visiting Trump is not new. There's been a lot. For everybody who's like blatantly Trump, Russia denial, it's a witch hunt, y'all are putting some pretty heavy blinders on. Now, for everybody who thinks that Trump is an absolute 100% controlled, lacking autonomy puppet of Putin, that's probably not actually true, right? Like, they probably just tried to cozy up to him and corrupt him, and he probably laundered money for them. That's the thing I think at the center of the mess is the most likely to be true. When X many condos and X many buildings that have Trump's name on it were bought for cash by shell companies that most of which trace back to Russian organizations and or Russian individuals, money laundering. Like, money laundering is the most popular crime in the world, especially in and around political circles. But let's zoom back out of that. Interesting, and I don't mean to muddy the waters. I wrote this down recently, but I never posted it. I think the most, given the hindsight, and I don't know that all of the evidence is there yet, because despite the glaring need to have a special counsel investigation, much like the Mueller investigation, into the actual content of the emails that were hacked, I don't know that we're ever going to get there. There's been some hubbub about it on and off, and there's obviously a whole lot of people screaming for that over on both on Trump's side and I think increasingly a little bit on the centrist, we're not quite Democrats, but we vote with them sort of group of that slice of the pie. The most interesting and I guess potentially, let's put it that way, potentially illuminating, because that second shoe may fall eventually. And who knows, in 20, 30 years' time, they might both be exposed, hopefully a lot less, hopefully maybe in their lifetimes. They might be both exposed and held accountable for this kind of behavior, because it's not improbable. But this illuminating moment from the election cycle was whatever whatever stage debate. Am I accusing them of being staged? Maybe a little bit, not like 100% scripted, but the most interesting moment that has just stuck in my craw. Sorry, it takes me forever to get to things sometimes, right? From that moment, from that debate during the election process was, puppet, you're a puppet. I'm not a puppet, you're a puppet. Puppet, 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 you're a puppet. We're both puppets. Why? Is it possible? Absolutely. That they're both corrupt? Yeah, here's why. Long before we got to that moment, building up from the moment he announced, I've been in the camp of people going, hey, you guys, for those of you who don't know his actual factual life history, he's been super close bosom buddy friends with the Clintons for like a bajillion years, and he's been a Democrat, and he's been a massive donator to, both, individuals of weird repute on both sides of the aisle. This guy was never a committed Republican, isn't a committed Republican, and arguably, based on his individual, real-life, observable behavior, isn't really all that much of an American. And I know, that's a bold thing to say, and Trump supporters, that's just gonna, trigger the shit out of them, and I apologize. I don't know how many Trump supporters listen to my show. I do know that randomly Trump supporters follow my social media. And social media is supposed to be a gateway to this show and a means by which, for fans who listen to the show, to engage with me and any potential future co-hosts. Put a pin in that if you're new. I talk about it in other episodes, the need and ongoing search for a co-host. Not going to waste more time on that now. I digress. So, it's not impossible that the two of them may be exposed, let us say, to money corruption. And arguably, that doesn't come from just one source. That comes from all over the place, right? Money flows between countries like mad in ways that I'm sure really don't get reported on. And forgive me for belaboring the point and for layering so many thoughts in a circular fashion like that. But I'll stick a pin here for those of you who aren't, or are new, or have never heard of this. It happened not too terribly long ago, but this incident, the Panama Papers. Apparently there is a resurgence in reporting about it, which is great, I think. But the Panama Papers leaks, if they're true and can be validated and confirmed, that's something I don't have personal ability to do, but that theoretically, should the law and order justice system take itself that seriously, might one day be investigated and tracked down. But according to everything I've read about that and heard about that, the Panama Papers leaks seem to indicate, with leaked data and information and documents from all over, from various sources, seem to indicate that there's a network of James Bond villain named, and I shit you not, that's real, James Bond villain named offshore blind trust bank accounts, or whatever they're technically called. That might be the wrong label. That doesn't mean I am making fake news. That means I just don't have my references in front of me. But those offshore accounts, the kind where no one can find out who actually owns them, but you can be told to make a deposit there, and you can make a deposit there, right? To pay people, whether or not you know who those people actually really are. So there's a bunch of them that have been exposed, and some of them are associated with known politicians. And what I find fascinating is that a long time ago there was a bit of hubbub about it, and there was a big posting, a big leak, and I don't remember if it was WikiLeaks or someone else, but there was a big posting about it, and it was like, oh wow, look at this. A lot of money flows from, surprise, surprise, Russia, and also, oh, surprise, 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 our allies in the Middle East, and through us, through America, surprise, 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 and through people from those countries and a million other countries, because it's just a network everywhere, and politicians from big countries, little countries. Like I said, I don't have all the literature on it in front of me. I'm just letting you know I've looked into that, and it seems like it's possibly legit. And I've been kind of absentmindedly banging that drum, like, why aren't we looking into that more? But let me digress. Let me return to my original point, because I didn't want to turn this into a Good Morning Trumptopia episode. This is the Almost Daily Zencast, and the title is The Dreamer, Dreaming the Dream from Within the Dreamer, or whatever it was, and who is the dreamer? And I kicked this off with, they are all puppets. And I'm really swirling around the bathtub trying to get at the point. We are all puppets. And that sounds devastating and potentially very cynical and really dark. Possibly, right? Or crazy sounding. To the best of my understanding, based on research and phenomenological experience, we human beings are semi-autonomous projections of the divine entity. By semi-autonomous, I mean that our experience of individuation is exceptionally vivid. It seems incredibly real, and thus we sit in this experience that we call living our lives in these bodies, and we conflate and confuse what we are for that which we are being. In other words, we are being these individual lives, and we are being these human beings. But that is not what we are. It's like, like Fight Club. You're not your bank account. You're not the khakis that you wear. And like all, whatever your favorite Buddhist-y quote about not being this person. And additionally, whether you believe in divinity or in spiritual beings or in things we call gods, it's sort of irrelevant whether you do or you don't, because that which is going on is bigger than any of our conceptions from our past that attempt to approach, to describe those entities and or beings. And thus, it gets difficult to discuss them, right? Ironically, it is the very objective of the game, the dance, the dream itself, that we are in, this simulation, as some people insist on calling it. It is a simulation, but it's an organic living one, as I've tried to point out. As I always try to point out to those who are kind of hooked on this, like, oh, it's a computer, we're just code. And I'm like, yeah, we are, but it's living code, it's organic code. It is that which is alive in the very real, that which is the universe. It's just way more complicated than our minimalist, materialist perspective lets us perceive. What does that have to do with politics? Why do I talk about this? What is my ideology if my ideology is abdicating all ideology, right? Where do I get this? If I claim to not have ideology, why do I then tell you things about cosmology, which many people would say is an ideological construct? To the best of my understanding, here's my latest expression of that which is, sort of the point there. the human species is not as individuated as it pretends to be. You and I, as individuals, we also simultaneously coexist as networked less than individuals in another layer of this reality that we are not currently well equipped to engage with. In large part because we're not even really well equipped to understand that which it is, therefore can't even conceive of imagining it, because we haven't been allowed to. It's not impossible to access this. It's not impossible to gain a comprehension of it. It's not impossible to quote, wrap our minds around it, wrap our brains around it, but we are not encouraged to do so. We are not encouraged by ourselves, by our own society that we've created. That's the game. That's the key. Now, one of the things that gets difficult to comprehend is, or especially if we're really clinging to the language as opposed to seeking the experiencing of it, right? Like, I'm not telling you these things because I want you to believe in my words. I'm telling you these things because I want you to go out and try to phenomenologically verify them for yourself. Why? Because that will make a huge difference. We are all puppets. Within us, as our Aboriginal brothers and sisters have always tried to remind us, are two wolves. You've probably heard, and forgive me if you haven't, I'm not trying to presume any judgment on anybody, but you may or may not have heard of the two wolves, parable, right? Within us are two wolves, a white one and a black one. They appear to be fighting. Who will win? The one that we feed the most. It's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street, it's a four-way street, it's a multi-dimensional bridge. Beyond the normal, ordinary plane that we limit our perception to, there are aspects of ourselves that are sort of the aggregate of the connective tissue between our individuated experience here in these monkey suits, in these talking meat sacks, in these exploratory space cosmos organism bio machines, these semi-autonomous movie cameras for God. And the game is that we experience just enough autonomy that we can condition ourselves to believe that we are nothing but the vehicle, that we are only this eyeballs and teeth and tongue and meat sack, right? And why have we done that to ourselves? Well, I talk about it at length in other episodes, so I won't bog this episode down with that. But the one key word that comes to mind that will sort of help you hone in on it, I think, if you're new or if you haven't listened to other episodes before, is profiteering. A vicious cycle of greed, profiteering, power, greed, profiteering, power, greed, profiteering, power. And all the tools and logics and ego arguments that extend from that. So when I say a politician is a puppet, they may or may not be corrupted by this or that other political player. But what I mean is that they are a puppet being hijacked and puppeteered by ego. Because one can allegorically conceive of some of the actions going on in these other dimensions that we ought to be paying attention to and learning how to communicate. Communicate's not quite the right word. Commune is, but that's currently not quite as popular and commonly understood in the lexicon of the human language, although it's still there. It's still in the dictionary, thank God. But we can commune with these other layers to varying degrees. And we can also commune with and be influenced by and also influence the what I call fractal energy beings, or meta-archons. I'm borrowing that language from somewhere. I think I might be unconsciously borrowing that from some Japanese anime show that I didn't watch, but read some trailer thing to. Maybe saw the trailer and read a blurb about. And I was like, oh, that word works. Because I was seeking a word. I have long been seeking a word for what to call these angels and demons, right? As one guru said, as I kind of round this out, I keep trying to make shorter and shorter episodes, but I keep rambling to the point of being at almost an hour, and I apologize, friends. One guru said, there is no God, there is no Satan. These words, these ideas, these icons, these images, these ideologies were originally intended as symbols for our own internal higher being and that which we might call ego. That which we might call our soul has two parts, which probably also emanate third and fourth parts, but that's a whole sacred geometry progression that we're not going to go down or follow that path just a second, because I've got to wrap things up. But these things are symbols for things not that are part of the dogma. And I'm not judging people who are religious or religious institutions for where they're currently at. But so it's confusing, right? Like, I reject the gods and demons of the religious dogma of the organized religions as we understand them today, because these are misrepresentations and misinterpretations. They are hyper-externalizations of internal phenomena. Our angels and demons are not out there somewhere watching over us like overlords. They are within us, internal to us, because we are them. But more accurately, they are us. They bring us into being and exist through us and manifest through us and experience through us. And ultimately, although there can be identifiable categories or different groupings, there is definitely like a team yin and a team yang, or to use different language, a light side and a dark side, a good team and a bad team. They are ultimately they themselves, like we are, them being us. They are not themselves. They are the originating source being them. It's all an emanation process, an expansion and collapsion process, a fractal recursion down into the material plane and back up and out of it, and inverse in all dimensions. It's like an infinity loop, where at the center of the infinity loop is the nexus, the unity, the one thing we incorrectly call God, and then made little cartoon figures of, and then put our belief in the cartoon figures instead of experiencing it. That can be experienced. The unity, the consciousness that is the creator, the renderer, the animator, the director, the scriptwriter, the playwright, the actor itself, the stage itself, the lights, the props, right? It is being those things and receiving those things and experiencing those things. That unity can, in a hall of mirrors, we are all reflections of the grander whole and inclusive reflections of the smallest part of it. We can experience it to greater and greater degrees of clarity. And that, my friends, is the game. Team Ego wants to prevent that phenomena from reaching the tipping point that would elevate the human species through a cocoon-like evolutionary transformation. That's its job. That's Team Ego's job. That is who puppeteers the bad guys. But that is not separate from any of us. And here's the hard-hitting, difficult pill to swallow, button for the end of the show. Ego is not an absolute concretified thing over there somewhere. All the bad guys here in our material world, we can point to monkey suits and go, bad monkey suit, bad monkey suit. The problem is, they look at us and go, you're the evil one. You're the crazy person. You're the one that's doing things wrong and I'm doing things right. Because this is a relativistic hallway of mirrors where each of our bodysuits emanates its own projections. That's the function that we're doing, being the semi-autonomous movie camera and film projector of God's infinite, immersive MMO movie, right? It's like God's creating and living through and experiencing a massive multiplayer, but he's all the players, immersive, multi-narrative, meat grinder of life and death, video game movie thing. And we're the avatars. And while we can sit around and argue about that avatar is more evil than this avatar, and that one deserves to die, and this one deserves not to die, that's all fair play. But if there can be a thing called the objective, which there really we shouldn't use that sort of language, right? But we kind of have to. We have to get to that precipice of calling it the objective and then transcend that tool of objectivity and of objectification. There's reasons why words that have really, really, really different meanings have the same root. We need to remember that and study them a little bit more harder. Like revolution and revolve and revolving door. That shit ain't an accident, folks. But I digress. We are not Satan. But Satan is us, right there with God. Right? Jesus isn't coming back a second or third time. That's our ego misconstruing the message. Yeshua Christos said we will become like him if we follow in his footsteps. And what are his footsteps but his actions? What are his actions but his practices? And what were his practices? Well, we really don't know anymore for sure, although some people who've researched beyond the dogma have some really interesting suggestions. If you're curious about that, I strongly encourage you to check out the segment of this show titled Unauthorized and Explicit Readings. Even if you're not interested in that, I humbly invite you to check out at least one recent episode of that show, because it's got a disclaimer that applies to this entire series, which one day, or I think I have done this already, one of these days I'm going to have to put that disclaimer in all the shows. But my friends, I have rambled on for quite a long enough time. I hope I've made sense, and I apologize for the winding, spiraling, crazy, semi-surreal, hopefully still lucid enough for y'all to understand way in which my brain works. And of course, realize that at this point, and up until now, my project has never tried to be a scripted show. I will, in fact, hopefully, in future, create more of like a scripted show of various forms, because I really want to do like a radio drama. Like I really want to create stories, fictional stories, right? And play them out in a radio drama format. I loved that shit growing up. And while it still can be found, it's not really sort of commonly trendy. It's not popular right now, although NPR does a good job of preserving little snippets of it with its live variety shows, etc. But I digress. Thank you for listening. Forgive me for the spiraling madness. Thank you for following, and hopefully some of this has made sense to you. As always, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily Zencast, with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.